Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to the Legal Services of Eastern Michigan Legal Lounge. It feels like it's been so long since we last checked in with you. My name is
I
Ash.
know.
Doesn't it feel like a while?
It does. I think we've just been so excited about this one. It makes the time go slower.
Oh man, maybe that's it, right? Time flies when you're excited, right? Or time moves slowly when you're excited. That would be the way to put it. Either way, I'm Ashney, like Ashy Knees, right? And my favorite cousin, one of my favorite cousins, with me today.
Katie Stanley, I am a staff attorney and fair housing education manager at Legal Services.
Oh, boom! I'm the education outreach coordinator for legal services, and there's that. And we have some really cool people joining us today. And Katie, was there anything you wanted to share before we jump into that?
Yes, I do want to share, just given the nature of this topic, we expect a lot of audience participation. We're so excited to field some of your questions, but just a quick disclaimer, nothing that you hear today will constitute as legal advice. Your situation is unique, just like you are, so don't take any of this as legal advice to your personal situation.
Boom. And there's that. And with that, we have some really awesome folks joining us today. We're super excited to get into it. This is my favorite part. I love when they pop up on the screen. It's like magic. And getting right into it, the first question that we have for everyone, per usual and always, right? We want to know a little bit about who's in the room. Tell us a little bit about yourselves and one of the many superpowers that you have. The question is for anyone who would like to start.
I'll go. Good evening, everybody. I'm attorney Kamila Horn. I am a staff attorney at Legal Services of Eastern Michigan. My primary areas there are consumer law, expungements, a little bit of housing, a little bit of driver's license restoration. And I would say my superpower is creativity, decoration, that type of thing.
Kamila does have the prettiest office in the entire office. I can vouch for that.
I'll go. My name is Mary Chartier, and I'm business partners with this really great guy named Takura Nyampakutsa, who just happens to be on screen with me here. We run and operate a criminal defense litigation firm. We practice all around the state. We do federal work. And I would say one of our superpowers, if I can speak for you, is exonerating those wrongfully convicted. We've had 2 in the past 7 months. A gentleman who was in prison for 26 years for a murder he didn't commit, and then another gentleman who was in prison for 9 years for a murder he didn't commit. And I just had a phone call with another client today, so we hope that we will have another one we can, welcome out as a free man. And my other superpower that I hold alone, not to Kurt, is I make really great smoothies. And I'm very proud of that. And I lure him to my house with smoothies whenever I need a favor. I'll be like, hey, got a smoothie for you.
That's right.
I just pictured like breadcrumbs leading Takura to your house.
I know, it
one
sounds
smoothie
creepy.
after
My
another.
husband says it sounds really creepy, but I'll be like, hey, can you help me with this? I have a smoothie. And then he'll like be right over.
Takura, how about you?
I was going to say ladies first, so I will.
Oh, yes.
Yes, please.
Well, I'll go. So my name is Simone Cason. I am the owner of Canis Capital, which is an insurance agency, and we insure everything from seed to sale, everything in between in the cannabis and craft beer space. And I mean, every product, even from supplements. We even have a product where you can go into certain dispensaries and get discounts off of your medical marijuana, all the way to life insurance, crop, health, event, consumption, you name it, we cover it. We're in Michigan, Illinois, and Massachusetts. And then I sit on a bunch of boards for social equity, and I guess they call me an advocate sometimes. Well, superpower is a big deal for me, and y'all, I don't know if you guys can see this, right? So I think I'm one of the few people that actually have a ring that's a Wonder Woman ring. That's the Wonder Woman ring. It's a collectible. So I've been wearing Wonder Woman underwear since I was 4 years old, and I still do, right? I ain't gonna tell y'all how old I am, but I'm still superheroes. So when y'all talk about somebody having a superpower, I think my biggest superpower is y'all. I'm literally not scared of nothing.
Oh,
Like nothing scares me. Absolutely nothing. Like no, you ain't getting that. So that would probably be my big thing. And yes, I am a grown woman, and I paid dearly for this Wonder Woman ring. It was an 80th anniversary, and I just had to have it. So,
well, you better hope our firm administrator, Tony Palmer Peterson, never sees you take that ring off because he loves Wonder Woman. We got a Wonder Woman.
We gotta hang out. Like,
yeah.
I know like a lot of useless information. Like, do you know that the same guy that came up with the wand came up with the lie detector? Did y'all know that? The rope?
I did not know that.
We can spend hours. I know a lot of useless information about Wonder Woman.
Then I won't tell you about my Wonder Woman tattoo. Then we are going to get you started. Takura,
everything. I still have underoos, so that's a little bit about me. Y'all go ahead.
yes.
How do I follow that?
Don't talk to us about your underwear, I guess.
Don't tell us about that.
So I'm fortunate to practice alongside Mary Chartier. She's a brilliant attorney. I'm still a fan of hers, and she's a fantastic friend. I guess my superpower would be that one of them would be that I have a bottomless pit for a stomach, right? Like she said, I've never turned a meal down ever. And what would my other one be? I guess open-minded, right? Because I think minds are like parachutes. They work best when they're open. So open-minded. There we go.
Takura, I believe you're also like a triathlete, aren't you?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yes,
a modest triathlete.
Yes, indeed.
And a 12-year Army veteran too.
Yeah.
True. Yes.
He's got lots of superpowers.
See, Takura's on my screen. He's in the middle, surrounded by all these beautiful women, and we're just building him up, and I love it.
That's right. Yeah, my head is about to explode. So yeah,
we don't want that. We don't want that. But we do have a question for you. Getting right into it, right?
Yes.
First question: what are the differences between legalization, decriminalization, and medical marijuana?
So I'm going to sort of go in reverse order. So medical marijuana is something that's been with us in Michigan for many years. And I could go very easily into many rabbit holes as it relates to this, but I'll resist the urge. So medical marijuana, essentially, there are certain conditions for which we know that medical marijuana provides significant relief for people who use that. Decriminalization, there are fortunately people who, again, for each of these, there are rabbit holes, but I'll just give you the succinct responses to each of these. Decriminalization, in essence, we're moving forward in time now to where we stand today, where having certain amounts of marijuana, right, irrespective of age, was illegal. In Michigan, you could do jail or even prison time. And there are actually, unfortunately, people who are still doing a lot of time based on nothing other than marijuana. And legalization, again, I think there we're talking about if you're of a certain age, as long as you have a certain amount and you don't smoke in certain places, then it's okay. Much like alcohol, right? If you're 21 years old, you can buy alcohol in a bar, but just you can't drink and drive. Same sort of thing with marijuana. So I hope that was an easy answer to follow for each of those.
Yeah.
You're gonna have more rights for legalization and medical marijuana than you do for decriminalization. When you hear prosecutors, sometimes at least before the recreational law came into play, you'd hear a lot of prosecutors say, well, they supported decriminalization. That's of the three that gives you the fewest protections under the law.
Can you say more, Mary, about that? What do you mean by that?
Sure. So with medical marijuana, essentially, you're not supposed to be denied any right or privilege because of, because that you possess a medical marijuana card. And that came into play recently when it was restricting marijuana use on probation. And that's been an issue we have been litigating for years, because you would have someone, whatever the reason, a bad back, a cancer patient, whatever the situation, they had a medical marijuana card, they would get into some legal trouble, whether it's, a retail fraud or whatever the situation was. And then you'd have a judge restrict their medical marijuana use while they were on probation. You'd have some judges say, well, you have to choose between a driver's license and a medical marijuana card, or you have to go back to your doctor and get something to use other than medical marijuana. And you want to scream, and you'd have to say it nicely, but when did you get your medical license, right? I mean, you're a JD, not an MD. You've got absolutely no business telling someone what they can use that their doctor prescribes for, or not prescribes, but certifies for them, right? Because you can't have a prescription, but the doctor is certified that it would be beneficial to them. But you'd have judges think that they could go in and restrict people from using a medicine. And then you'd have judges say, well, listen, Kerr, you walked in just fine. I don't think you really have a bad back. And anyone who's ever had a back problem knows, it may not look like you have a back problem, but you have a back problem, right? I mean, it hurts. With medical marijuana, for example, using it on probation, the Court of Appeals now said a judge can't restrict that. It's a right, it's a privilege that can't be restricted. And so that carries over to legalization and recreational use. You've got rights under the law, as opposed to decriminalization, which just means I'm not going to prosecute you for this. It doesn't give you any rights under the law, but you're just not going to get prosecuted for it.
Wow. So when we talk about all of this, I think it automatically brings up some of the equity issues around enforcement in some of these laws. And as you talked about, there are still people in prison today for selling as small as a dime bag of marijuana. What is social equity? When we talk about it in this context, what is social equity and what do we mean by that? And Simone, I think this is right up your alley.
Well, social equity is going to be different and the same depending on, because we know that this is state by state, right? And so our states actually govern, because as Mary has already said, that this is not federally legal. And so the states get a chance to be the governing body. But in essence, what it basically means is that there are provisions for individuals or communities or entities that are located in those areas that were most impacted by the war on drugs. Pretty much saying, hey, you as the government cannot benefit fairly on a activity that you've put me behind bars on, right? So in the state of Michigan, the way that we define it is because we have affirmative action. We define it by geographic. And so they geographically kind of create picked 72 municipalities, and those municipalities have been deemed the most disproportionated from the war on drugs or what have you. And in those, then the state is now looking to create provisions for individuals and entities to be able to enter this market with a fair market value and fair trade.
So, I mean, you guys are the experts. I'm no expert, but I do know that a lot of these licenses, when they started opening this up, were already long spoken for. So along with that, what are some of the barriers to equity in this industry that you see? Because Simone, you're in this.
Capital.
Yes.
Where the money resides, where the money resides, where the money resides. What is access to capital?
Gotta have racks on racks on racks.
And racks on racks on racks on racks.
As the users would say.
Yeah. And so that is the narrative, right? We know that. There's a host of other things that I think go along with it. But the nuts and bolts and the biggest obstacle is going to be access to capital. And so what that means is there's a couple of different things that have to be looked at. When we look at social equity, I think one of the things that we look at is that we think that it only means entrepreneurship. It doesn't. right? Equity means ownership, and it does, but in this realm, we have to look at it as I'd say 4 prongs, right? First is going to be consumer dollars, right? So we actually live in a society now where we all have access to our phones, social media. If I got something that I want to say, I want everybody to hear, guess what? I can get it to 1 million people really, really quickly. We see it in Target, we see it in McDonald's, we see it in everybody. When McDonald's say ba-da-ba-ba-ba, you are speaking directly to the African American, right? And so we have to demand that these cannabis companies talk to who? Women like me. I am the most influential person in the consumer in the United States. If you don't believe me, go ask Nielsen. The Black woman's power has the biggest pocket. So we have to be able to leverage this conversation and make sure that they are selling directly to us. And not only that, keeping our community involved and in mind. And that's what we're demanding from every single other industry. And we got to demand it from the cannabis industry also. The next one is employment, making sure that there are policies and procedures for a fair wage value. Understand this, if you are a hairstylist or if you are a barber or a mechanic, once you get a certificate, there is a minimum wage that they have to be able to ask you. In addition to that, that takes the earnest off of the employer, and you get out of these predatory contracts where the employer has to train the new employee and then make them sign a non-compete. And at that point, they can't go get another job for 2 years because maybe things didn't work out. But if we create win-win solutions for everybody, maybe you can get something done. The next one is going to be access to capital for entrepreneurs. What do entrepreneurs need? They need to be able to raise money. Now, me, on the MRA, I created the Michigan Marijuana Stock Market, which is a local stock exchange that will be coming soon, where individuals and entities will be able to raise money in a local stock exchange up to $1 million, and investors that are local residents will be able to invest in it. It's real, real deep. I got 4 attorneys, 6 accountants, and 2 departments. Don't get me started. The next one and the last one is going to be, the last one will be after we do that, investment opportunities. Now, everybody knows that this is a great industry. I just got a chance to, earlier today, I sat on the board of a new fund that's coming out that is a cannabis fund. Me and a bunch of white men with a whole lot of money, $20 million at a minimum. So these funds, we see the opportunity. We have not seen an opportunity like the green rush since the tech industry. When we saw it then, you had to be really smart or really, really rich. In cannabis, you ain't got to be neither one. So we have to create pathways where residents can be able to get into this industry and they don't have to necessarily touch it. So somebody that's 65 years old that is retired and has a little extra money should be able to invest in these businesses. And you know what? Businesses that are locally invested have a better chance of doing well than businesses that are not. So I just gave you 4 ways. Y'all can go on and pay me now, and I can get on up out of here.
Wait, give me the 2 was employment, 3 was access to capital for entrepreneurs, 4 was in investment opportunities. What was
Number 1 was consumer dollars.
Consumer
that black girl magic.
Pen. Okay.
Yeah, that black girl magic.
Dollars. Now, going into next question. How do federal laws from marijuana usage vary from state laws? And you kind of, Simone, in your answer, you talked about social equity, and you said social equity varies by state, right? So go into the legal aspect of it, right? How do federal laws for marijuana usage vary from state laws, right? And then what impacts do these similarities or differences have on the state of Michigan residents?
That's an attorney question.
Takura's jumping it. That's what.
Yeah, but do you want to
You go ahead. I know I'll have some more to add on. Please. Yeah.
It's illegal under federal law. You can't possess it. You can't grow it. You can't sell it. That's just the bottom line. It's illegal under federal law. Everyone who's involved in the cannabis industry knows that, and knows that there's this overarching illegality federally. Now, what's really interesting is marijuana is classified as the most severe substance under federal classification, right? They say there's absolutely no medical benefit to marijuana whatsoever. There's none.
Schedule 1.
Right. But what's interesting is the federal government actually holds multiple patents where in the patents they talk about how cannabis is medically beneficial to people. So the same government that says there's no medical benefit, that's why we have to keep it, illegal and so horrible. And Simone mentioned, I think the war on drugs, this is so terrible, is the same government that actually holds patents. And it's also the same government that since the 70s has sent cannabis to various individuals throughout the country under this settlement program where they have to grow marijuana and send it to these folks. And these people live, and some of them still do, for a very long period of time. I have one of the containers. They send them every month, these rolled up marijuana cigarettes. So there's just tremendous hypocrisy. What a shock, right? In DC. I think you're seeing, right, you're seeing some changes, hopefully, that will happen soon. You're seeing, with the Democratic president and, Democrats more in control, there is at least talk of changing that law. That law is extremely outdated. It has resulted in people spending just decades in prison for marijuana. And there, as Takur said, there are people still there. Now, the way the law is structured now is, just in a nutshell, the federal government is not supposed to be prosecuting individuals who are complying completely with state law. So they're supposed to be hands off on that. So if people are complying with every aspect of Michigan law, they're supposed to be hands off on that. They're also not supposed to use certain funds to prosecute people who are claiming that they're complying under state law. So there are some defenses in that area, but they are still prosecuting people. In fact, there was just a prosecution about 2 weeks ago for marijuana in federal court in Michigan.
Yeah, in federal court, judges give sentences like they're Skittles, just ridiculous amounts of time. And, again, we're not going to talk about prosecutorial discretion and all of this. But again, even if you are following the MCLs, right, Michigan codified laws, but to the letter, still, you could find yourself on your way to some federal facility. And the hypocrisy, we see it where, with regard to opium, right, those laws were targeted at Chinese immigrants. With alcohol, it was targeted against Irish immigrants. Marijuana, really, when those laws started, it was aimed at Mexican immigrants. But again, it's now having a disparate impact on minorities, including Black people and so on. But again, just the amount of time that people are doing because of marijuana, despite the patents that Mary mentioned and everything else that's going on, is talking out of both sides. It's offensive, I think.
Yes.
Anyway.
And Takura and Mary both bring up the history of the war on drugs and the history of marijuana policy. And it's so fascinating when you start to read about people like Henry Kissinger and some of these policies that were tied to the paper industry because they were threatened by hemp. Yep. Some of the origins of some of these things are also tied to financial interests. So there's all of these dynamics at play that are so nuanced and, like you said, end up having a disproportionate effect on the populations that already have suffered the worst under the policies of the federal government. So jumping to
the war on drugs.
Go ahead, yeah.
The war on drugs is just, it's been a tremendous failure. It has, destroyed communities and families in this country. And for it to continue at any level is just, it ignores what's absolutely happening in this country. There are people who have committed murder, and we saw that in Minnesota, who will serve less time in prison than clients convicted of drug distribution for extremely small amounts of drugs and nonviolent offenders, right? So someone who intentionally took a life is going to spend less time in prison than someone who is convicted federally for drug distribution and sometimes in state court. And just one last point, if you take the drug amount, right? So if you take how much, for example, a kilo of cocaine or a half a kilo of cocaine, and you look at that amount, and then you look at how much time someone will spend for that amount of drugs versus how much they would spend in prison if it were just a financial fraud crime, someone might be spending 20 years in prison versus someone spending maybe 6, 8, 10, 12 months in prison. It's vastly disparate. And if you think about it, drug crimes are generally consenting adults. We can talk about, the all the other, parts of it. But generally, someone is consenting to use drugs and purchase it from someone else. I don't know anybody who's consenting to be the victim of a financial fraud crime. I don't know anyone who sign me up for a Ponzi scheme or sign me up for you to steal my money. So if I steal money from somebody, my time in prison is going to be extremely short compared to if I sell drugs to somebody. That's a huge inequity.
And very quickly, I know we have other
yeah.
things we want to move on to, but if I may, very quickly, clearly, despite these long sentences, it's not working, because as soon as somebody is shipped off to prison, somebody else replaces them on that corner. And we just spoke to somebody a few weeks ago on our podcast, Mary, you know what I'm talking about, who was entrapped, a veteran. He went off, he had some PTSD issues, was entrapped, and for about a blunt, he faced a life sentence in prison. Crazy.
I was in Louisiana.
Anyway, So.
Katie, you had a question for me?
No, I was just going to move on to the next question. I mean, I always have questions for you.
Oh, no, I heard you say Simone, so I didn't know.
Well, so I guess we've already talked about this is the reality, and we're not advocating for any policy change. We're just talking about the effects of these policies. So given what the reality is of these policies right now, and Mary, this blew my mind when you talked at our Fair Housing Conference. What are some of the most common misconceptions that you all see about marijuana in your work that really get people the most often?
For me, I think the biggest misconception that people have is that there are just no more marijuana prosecutions. That's what Takura and I see. People think the federal government will not be interested in them anymore, or that there are no more state marijuana prosecutions. And there are continued federal marijuana prosecutions. Again, there was one that was just a few weeks ago. We know someone who just got convicted and is spending over 10 years in prison. And there are still state marijuana prosecutions, because what's happening is people who, again, don't have the money or choose not to go the licensing route are, coming up with their own little side business. And there's a big crackdown in that market. And people think that's not going to happen, and it is. And they're facing the same punishment, the same penalties under, the public health code that they would have even before it was legal. People think that, again, this is just, they can do what they want and the government's not going to get involved. And that's not true.
Well, and I remember you were talking about some of the weight misconceptions, especially with,
Sure.
Yes. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So people will say like, oh, if I only have under 100 plants, the federal government will not be interested in me. So if I just have 99 plants, then they can't prosecute me, or if I'm just under a particular weight. And that's not true at all. For federal cases, especially if they really want to get somebody, they'll get like everybody in the chain under a conspiracy argument. They'll get the smallest person who's just trimming, and then they'll get, the person who's growing, and everybody in the middle. And then they freak them out because they say, well, Takura, you're looking at 10 years. I know you're the trimmer, but, so if you can give me, Katie, right, then we can talk. And what Takura's going, I know you would never, you'd never give him, but people start talking and people, right. And they do, right? They get them on the phone and right. So people think the weight matters, and the weight doesn't matter. If the feds want to get you, they'll go after you.
So what about with like concentrates and edibles and things? There's all these different things now where people can just go to the store and buy them. Is that stuff treated differently, say, than the loose flower that people might be more familiar with? Are there some nuances that people should be aware of if they're driving with those things?
So I'll jump in again. So with driving, the law right now is there's not a set amount. There's always talk about setting an amount, so for alcohol, 0.08 and above is, presumed to be operating under the influence. And if you have that, they just have to show that. And if they prove it to the jury, then you're convicted. With marijuana, there's no cutoff, because I could use and, Simone could use, and it might have very different impact on us. So there's always talk about a 5 nanogram cutoff or anything like that. But there is not that. T?
Although there is a bill, let's be clear, there is a bill in the works, right, by a representative who's pushing very hard for like you said, that 5 nanogram cutoff. And Mary, could you tell us very briefly about a case called People versus Kuhn?
Oh, yeah, sure.
I think that's relevant to this discussion.
That was our case, right? So
Yes, that's what I was getting at.
Right, our win at the Michigan Supreme Court. The 5 nanogram stuff is not supported by science. It's not, it's not like alcohol where, it dissipates, marijuana dissipates sort of, at a downward trajectory. It's not like that at all. So 5 nanogram, it's not supported by science. And in fact, there was actually a commission appointed with, police on it and prosecutors, and they said the same thing. People versus Kuhn essentially said that for prosecutors to get you for driving with marijuana in your system, they have to show there's a substantial and material impact on your driving. If I'm just driving and I, happen to, go through a yellow light, that's not, they have to prove that my marijuana usage had a substantial material impact on my driving. I think Takura had a case where the guy was driving down the wrong way. I mean, he was doing all kinds of crazy stuff. He was hanging out the window. So hey, very easy for them to prove that. You know what I mean? He was like, but that's what they have to prove. And it's not it's not an unbearable burden for them. And they've been doing it for years now.
And I'll add, there have been some pilot projects in different counties where they were pulling people over, and kind of like they do with alcohol, where they do a PBT. They thought they could do the same with marijuana. They look at your tongue. Is it green? Some people suggested that that's the magic test. Boy, if you have a green tongue, then we can get you for this. There are a lot of people. It's in the works. It's in the works, coming to a neighborhood near you. Contact your representative, and but again, there's so many tangents and rabbit holes we could go down. But no, there's no magical number that's a cutoff.
I do remember, just a quick before I bounce it back to my partner in good trouble over here. I do remember I used to work for Mary and Takura. Full disclosure, they're one of my favorite people, and I just bring them on and into my life in every which way I can possibly since I left. But I believe, Mary, you had a case when I worked for you that the person, they had smoked marijuana at one time, but you had to explain to the judge that there's a different active component, that he may not have been actively high. You may test positive for weeks after you may have not used marijuana for weeks, and you could still test positive when you're driving, but you haven't smoked in weeks. And I think you were the one, Mary, you had a case like that.
A lot of judges don't realize there's a difference between essentially the active amount of marijuana and then the metabolite or the carboxy. And so if you look at a lab report, it'll show active, let's say 4 nanograms, and then it'll show the carboxy level, and it might show 65, and people are like, oh my gosh, you know what I mean? You're so high. It's not. It's the waste product, and that waste product can be in there for weeks and weeks and weeks. And unlike alcohol, it doesn't necessarily, again, go down with a downward trajectory. It may go to 40 and then go back up to 50 the next day and then go back to 40. That's not an indication of recent use necessarily. I mean, it may be if it's 4 months later, right? But it's not if it's within, like a reasonable time span of weeks or even 30 days. It's because, marijuana, we know, is stored in fat cells. So if I work out, I'm going to be, more is going to be coming out of my system. I mean, there are all these different biological reasons for it. And there's a real educational process with judges. Judges will say, well, all right, Katie, you used marijuana before, but I need to see that going down, right? Right. Sorry. I keep using Takura as my pot user and my hypotheticals. And then we want to see it go down. If it goes up, it's a sign that you recently used. No, it's not, right? I mean, that's just bad science. And if we have learned nothing else from this pandemic, we should be trusting science, and not just letting judges hang on to these really antiquated and false notions about the science of marijuana, including how it leaves your system, and including the fact that, I had a judge say, oh, your client's just Johnny Feelgood, right? He doesn't really have a medical issue. Well, you know what I mean? A doctor said he had a medical issue. So, you know what I mean? You've got nothing to say about it. I said a lot nicer than that. But he really didn't. People have these really, really silly and antiquated notions about marijuana, but yet they're fine if somebody goes to the doctor and gets a prescription for really, really strong painkillers.
Okay, so can landlords ban the use of medical marijuana on the premises, right? Like, can you be evicted for marijuana use?
In federal housing, yes. So in federal housing, because it's illegal under federal law, they can say, and you can't, right? I mean, that's not just the landlord saying that, it's federal government saying that you can't use. In a regular situation, a landlord, if they've got a policy against smoking, can say no smoking, right? Whether it's marijuana or not. They can, they can say no growing. They're going to have a difficult time with saying no using, because, if you want to bring your little space cakes in, or, you want to, have your edible oil or concentrate, I mean, they're not going to be able to drill down to that level. But there are restrictions, and they can restrict on a public place. And there's the jury's out on whether a porch is a public place. We know that a car we know that a car in a public parking lot is a public place. But some people say a porch is a public place. I disagree with that analysis. Just because someone can see you doesn't mean it's a public place. I don't think that, Ashley, if she's on her porch, is fine with me sitting on her porch and saying, well, this is a public place, right? I'm just going to take a break. I can see it, but it's on her property. I mean, I would imagine, maybe you'd welcome me there, but now that you know me, but if you don't know me, I mean, you're not just welcoming anyone to come sit on your lawn. So, I mean, but the argument among prosecutors is that that's a public place because it can be seen. I think the analysis would fall under that, but, we'll have to wait to see what an appellate court says.
And here's my penny, if I could, not even 2 cents, just one. It's ironic that that argument that just because you can see it, it's a public place. But given case law, Jardinez, right, about the curtilage, the United States Supreme Court has said that the curtilage, which is the area immediately surrounding your home, right, the porch and such, is not the same as the roads that we all drive on and whatnot. But yeah, it's crazy. But stay tuned. We'll duke it out, and we'll see. Hopefully make some good law.
Yes, and one place that I've seen this, and I actually had a client once who he lived in subsidized housing, in Section 8 housing, which is federally funded, and his buddy across the street could sit on his porch and smoke all day long, and he called me and said, I'm genuinely disabled under the definition of the Americans with Disabilities Act. I have a medical marijuana card. They're threatening to take my voucher. And I had to tell him that we're able to get what's called reasonable accommodations for people with disabilities. And what that means is a reasonable change in policies and procedures to accommodate their disability. But in this case, as Mary said, because it's federally illegal still, we can't ask for accommodations for medical marijuana, even in the cases where it's a real legitimate medical issue. So this guy was just like, this makes no sense. I'm sitting across the street from somebody doing the exact same thing and I can't do it. How come I can't do it? He's literally 30 feet away from me. So I just had to throw that story in there because you see this a lot where there's disparities in how this plays out in real life with real people. These are real people that this affects.
Well, the Veterans Administration changed their policy a number of years ago, but for many years, even when medical marijuana laws had been passed around the country, if you admitted that you were using medical marijuana, they would not treat you. Even though there are lots of studies saying that medical marijuana is very beneficial for not just all the aches and pains and all the real injuries that people have, but also PTSD. Oh, yeah. And then ultimately they changed that policy after a lot of pressure, but it took a lot of years. And you wonder how many veterans were denied services during that time frame who really needed services, and what was the impact on them?
Now, you all alluded to this a little bit earlier, right? But I'm gonna ask this question anyways. Despite legalization in Michigan, do you still see criminal charges related to marijuana? And what are some of the most common?
What distribution, right? If you give it to a friend, right? If you want to share with a friend,
yeah, what we call P-Win.
Sharing is good if it's candy, but not if it's your weed, right? You don't want to do that. So you'll see people, for example, caregivers or patients who grow too much. And so, they grow too much under the law for recreational or under the medical marijuana law. So they have too many plants and they're giving it to, and selling it to too many people. So we're seeing that a lot. We're seeing, the OUID, the operating under the influence of drugs, that's still coming up. So those are kind of two of the bigger ones. Mm-hmm. And then you'll have some young people who are under the age who are possessing or using marijuana. I'm not seeing that, and I don't think you are either as much, but kind of the bigger charges are the distribution charges. Because like Simone talked about, people are spending and investing millions of dollars into licenses in their business, and then they don't like that someone is not investing that money and then is just like operating outside of the law. And then we have had people with licenses really pressure prosecutors and the police to go after people who don't have licenses or are still distributing.
Well, the big boys are coming, so that's the thing. And I, like I said, I get a chance to sit at the table of a lot of exclusive tables, and they are very, very upset as far as the how to control the black market, individuals, and I'm talking about major corporations. Is usually those mid-sized businesses, right? Businesses that have multiple locations for dispensaries, businesses that have multiple locations for growing. All of those are the ones that are really looking at the shrinkage or the supply and demand kind of thing, and those are the ones that are really lobbying for change in what we have currently under what individuals can grow and gift and all that. They seem to be the most threatened. With that being said, if you want to be in the industry, right, I'm going to encourage you, get in legally, right? And this is the time, because it's still a low hanging fruit. When we look at what it takes to actually get into the industry, I think, what was it? When they first did it, what were the licenses? $36,000 or something like that for an application? It was something ridiculous, right? Now it's down to $6,000, right? And then we are in a legislation, we're in a political climate where social equity, reparations, opportunity, venture capital, investing, angel, y'all, I could go all day. All of these opportunities. We have a super computer and God and Google right here. I can make $5,000 right here. Y'all sit here and watch me. You know what I mean? I can go in and I'm bad. Y'all can go, you can go in and watch me. And so what I'm saying is that we have opportunities. We are able to have these conversations. We can get our message out really, really quickly. So there's a difference. So remaining in a situation where you're illegal, that is a choice. You don't have to. There are initiatives and policies and procedures that are there. Are they perfect? Absolutely not. I don't know when the government has ever been. But at least there are pathways that exist, and then you can obtain legal, accounting, and all of these other advisories to be able to put you in a position to do well. Does that make sense?
Yes. One of the barriers, I think, though, is there are real obstacles if people have convictions on their record, and I think that talking about expungements is the way to really
let's address that. One thing that we have in Michigan, we have changed some of the expungement laws. That's the first thing. And I ain't even an attorney, and I know that. The second thing is that we have expungement clinics. I look on my Facebook every week, and it's somebody doing an expungement clinic or whatever. Now, the issue with this, and you guys, the attorneys, y'all come on in and help me.
On the questions. You jump on the question list. The head on the question list. Go on up.
That's because we're sharp. This is not our first time at the rodeo.
Go ahead.
All right. So with the expungement, what we do know is that there are qualifications, and I'm going to throw it back to the attorneys really shortly, so you guys can. There are qualifications for you to be able to meet. But let's just be honest. Let's be honest. If we're talking about brown and black people that are actually looking at, or people that are in these zones that may quote unquote have a criminal record, in most cases, they're not going to be the sole entrepreneur in this endeavor. Am I right or wrong? If I'm wrong, I got a bridge in Brooklyn you can buy. They're not going to be the sole entrepreneur. So with that being said, if there is a point, if you own less than 10% of this entity, you do not have to be listed on the actual list. What I'm telling you is you need to be creative. The day of education is over. It is now about innovation and creativity. Get creative.
Simone says,
Well,
creative, understand. Now, I do want to, I hear you, Katie, coming in this thing, but I know Mary was about to offer something about the barrier. So we got Simone saying you got the expungements, you got the loopholes, you got God, you got Google, and some other stuff.
You got God and Google, you can make it. That's the starting point right there.
I think Camilla knows a lot about expungements, right? And can offer, like, as Simone said, I mean, I think she offered, great advice, right? If you've got convictions and you're eligible to get expunged, get them expunged. There are all these different avenues to do so where you don't have
that
to.
We didn't have, Mary. We didn't have this 5 years ago. Right. This was not even an option 5 years ago. I'm going to say this to you guys. When I came up with the marijuana market, I did not have one statute or policy change. I found a bill and I walked it backwards. Now, when they created the MIM Act, they never created for some Black woman to figure out how Black people can invest in weed. I know they didn't. There's somebody rolling in their grave. This actual act was created for real estate. It was created so that businesses, people that were local residents would be able to invest in REITs. After 2008 and 2009 and 2016, when the Reg CF Act came in and the Jobs Act, when that went in, they created this so that people would be able to reinvest in real estate. They had no idea some Black woman from Muskegon was going to come up with this brilliant idea to walk it backwards. That's crazy. We have now more provisions, and I'm not saying that it's perfect. I'm saying that right now we got 5 years for the little man to get into the market. We don't have time for you to wait and keep talking about what we don't got. We don't got a whole lot. We need to be focused on what we do have and make those provisions. And that's when you obtain attorneys, counsels, and lobbyist teams so that you can create pathways that are going to be able to get us inception. If we keep waiting around, we're going to do the same thing that happened in the tech. It's going to happen in this one. It's gone.
Simone, I have a check for you, Simone.
You got a check for me.
Who should I make it to?
Wait,
What's that?
Wait a minute. Don't be talking about giving me money. You know I get excited.
Now, right? One of those things that I heard is that there are some barriers. One way to remove some of those barriers are expungements, and I feel like that's the perfect time for my cousin Katie to drop a little nugget on you.
You guys, I just have to say, you brought this up, and guess who is doing an expungement fair in France on July 30th, 2021? If anybody's interested in our service area that wants to learn more about expungements and whether or not they're eligible, and we have our resident expungement expert here down, attorney Camilla Horn, please call by 7/22. That is 2 days from now. We got 2 more days. You got to register ahead of time because it's really high demand and we've got limited resources. 1-800-322-4512. Register. Get yourself an expungement. All right, Ashley.
Get it off your record. Get it off your record.
1-800. What's the number again? 322.
1-800-322-4512, and that is in our 14 county service area in the Eastern District of Michigan. So Flint folks, give us a call.
Now, what that makes me think, so this conversation we were having about expungements, and I feel like we'll circle back around to some of those points you were starting to make as well, Mary, right? It makes me think this, right? Who has been the most significantly impacted by the criminalization of marijuana, right? That's my question.
I would probably, I don't know, right? Okay, but I'm going to say definitely minority. What we do know is African American men and Hispanic men are 3 to 4 times more likely that, this is a stat, right? 3 to 4 more times likely to be picked up or due to drugs, right? We just know that racial profiling and all that other stuff. But then, while I was on the MRA board, still am on the social equity board, one of the things that people brought up were they were talking about women, right? And so one of the things I don't think that we've talked about so much is that when those fathers or husbands or boyfriends are removed from those families, what kind of position did it see? I didn't think about that either. It's a good one. So what kind of position does that put those wives in? Were they, Was it a situation of, maybe she couldn't go to school, maybe she couldn't finish school, being forced to be on maybe public assistance, all those other things. So when we talk about who was the most impacted, I think it has to be the communities and not just a gender section, right? Because we're looking at the disenfranchised of those total communities, which would embody the entire family.
I think that's a
phenomenal
response.
I think that's cool. Yeah, but whatever you guys got. Yeah. Thank you.
No additions, deletions, or corrections.
No, that's
Mic drop, guys.
Right.
Next
Y'all
question.
are so funny. Oh, this is good. I knew this was gonna be a good time when I was gonna be on with a bunch of attorneys. When Ashley told me it was me and a bunch of attorneys, I said, "Oh, this is gonna be good."
Usually, I don't know if we get that characterization, so we'll totally take it.
I like attorneys because y'all think y'all know everything about everything. It's a good time. You can be like, it's cheese. And they're like, well, let me tell you all about it.
We help solve problems you didn't know you had in ways that you don't understand.
Yeah. I love hanging out with attorneys because you're going to learn so much because they have a antidote or a story for every single thing. You're like, I broke a nail. They were like, let me tell you about that.
Mary broke a tooth in court. She can tell you
Ashley, you're muted.
Yeah, I had to continue.
I was like,
yeah,
that's kind of how you're able to give us like the rundown from the rooter to the tutor of the cannabis industry. And like, you got that thing on lock. That being said, my next question is, see what I did there? How do you see the new expungement laws affecting criminal marijuana changes?
And Kamila, we are calling you in on this one. I'm calling in the Kamila expungement expert.
I'm here. All right. So, first of all, for expungement purposes, there's two new laws that came out April 12, 2021. One specifically addresses the marijuana, misdemeanor marijuanas are the ones that are included. And if you have a conviction date after December 6, 2018, that's the magic date, December 6, 2018, then you can apply to have an expungement there for your misdemeanor marijuana offenses. There is no limit on the numbers for that particular one after December 6, 2018. And the beautiful part about that particular misdemeanor marijuana is that you don't have to go through the perils of some of the expungement experience, meaning that you don't have to worry about serving the attorney general or the Michigan State Police or anything like that. You just go to your local court, fill out an application, and set aside the conviction, list all those misdemeanor marijuana convictions that you had after it became legal on December 6th of 2018. And then you'll either the prosecution will have a chance to respond. If they do not respond or answer within 60 days, then the court within 21 days after the 60-day mark, if the prosecution does not respond, then they have to set aside the conviction. So if the prosecution does answer, then a hearing is set in 30 days. So it's basically the marijuana law to set aside the misdemeanors are pretty much local. So if they're December 6th of 2018. But for those who have convictions prior to December 6th, 2018, there's still an opportunity to have it expunged under the regular expungement law. And that would require that you have no more than 3 felonies, qualifying felonies, should I say. And then any misdemeanors that are qualifying, which would include marijuana misdemeanors, can be expunged also. So, but through that process, if it's prior to December 6, 2018, you would have to go through the normal channels of filling out the application, serving the Attorney General, Michigan State Police, waiting for a hearing date, etc. So that's the difference between that. So the magic date is December 6, 2018. Either prior or after would tell you how to proceed in terms of an expungement. And
December.
it's for misdemeanor marijuana offenses. No.
Look at our good Kamila. I love this.
I mean, she just gave like the rundown. Now, I do
I
want
know.
to take a quick moment to loop back to Mary, right? So there was a part of the conversation, right, where we were talking about the barriers, right? And Simone was like, if you're going to get in the game, get legal right now. And Mary was like, yeah, but also here's some considerations, right? And Simone's like, do it right now, right? I want to take a moment and transition into the next piece and then throwing that back to you, because Mary, could you kind of lean into a little bit about what you were going to mention, right? So yeah, we want to get legit, but also we want to acknowledge that we do have some additional barriers that might make it difficult for some folks to get legit. Did I pick that up? Did I pick up what you were putting down there?
You did, and I think Simone recognized that when we talked about convictions. So, when people have convictions on their record, they're precluded from getting involved, at least at certain levels. Right. And we just heard, a great recitation of the new expungement laws. So that's fantastic. And that addresses at least the concerns for people who can get some offenses expunged. Then you have the issue of wealth. Investing, and this is, coming from an immigrant family, generational wealth is a big deal, right? My parents didn't have any money. Everything I've earned, I've had to earn, from scratch. For some people, they don't have money to invest. I think when there are projects like what I'm hearing Simone talk about, which is where you can get a collective, like a group of people. So somebody doesn't have to have $1 million or $100,000 to invest. They might have $1,000, and that might be money that they pooled from 4 or 5 different relatives, but that can get them in, a small portion, and then that can, start to blossom, and then that can give them some returns on their investment, and then that they can put that back in or use that for the next generation, whatever it is. I think those are real barriers for people, and I think again, I love what Simone has thought, because I think you've thought about those barriers and have opened it up for that.
Boom.
Simone's muted.
So these policies and procedures, these are things that I've actually implemented, right? With my own money and crowdfunding and VC angel investors, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. But one thing that I want you guys to really wrap your mind around this when you guys have these conversations about social equity. When we talk about funds and Section 8 and all of those other different things, and we talk about these, we put so much focus on barriers for people of color. That's white privilege. That is white privilege. It is white privilege to give us a Section 8 and everything else, and not for us to focus on what we do have that is tangible. Understand, when I actually started to talk about these businesses, one of the things that the MRA said, they said, Simone, the biggest barrier is real estate. I said, well, they have to have real estate because we don't want to create a Ponzi scheme. Why should I create a pathway that is not conducive to success for Black and brown Americans? We have to get out of the stand of everything that we can't do. I don't want to hear that anymore. Don't tell me what we can't do. We're in a time post-pandemic. We're in a time where people are actually, do you know that this is the first time where African Americans actually sit at a table and talk about investing, where we have MEMS, where people, the retail investors are actually controlling Wall Street? I don't want to hear that anymore. That's a form of white privilege. We have to get to the point where we understand that there are policies, procedures, and not only that, initiatives that we can actually spearhead. Let's start there. Let's start the conversation there. I don't want to hear about what I can't do no more.
So let me ask you, right? If I were looking to get social equity, because I feel you got me hyped, right? Where would I start?
The first thing that you have to do is you have to get an award letter, and you would have to live 5 to 10 years in a disadvantaged zone, or one of the what we consider the racial equity zones. Right? So that's the first thing. And the Michigan Marijuana Regulatory Agency has deemed that, and they decided where those are. If you can prove residency for 5 out of the 10 years, then there is a link and you're going to go in and apply. If they see that you meet the qualifications, then there are then discounts. That is not a Section 8 check for you to start a weed business. That's not what that means. That means that you get a discount. Stop calling me and telling me you got your social equity license. That's not a license. It's a discount. Okay, so then you're discounted on that. At that point, then you go in and then you apply for your pre-qualification, and then at the final approval, then that discount is awarded to you. That is how it goes.
And to what entity? Wait a minute. To what entity am I getting the award letter from?
Michigan Marijuana Regulatory Agency under LARA, which is our licensing and government regulation.
Got it. And how do I leverage my relationship with social equity?
Well, I think you have to understand that when we get to a place where people have to understand that there is profit in diversity. I want everybody to say that there is profit in diversity, not just diversification, but diversity. When you can sell a product or create a environment where multiple entities win, that is profitability. I don't have to sell that to you. That's a true fact. Right? So when we look at this, couple things that we need to happen. Well, we know that the state wants to be able to have as many great businesses as possible because, of course, at what point, what are they going to do? They're going to continue to create revenue streams under taxation, and that makes, and anytime you have a happy market in a state or in the United States, then that's taxation, that's more money, everybody looks good, right? In addition to that, the corporations, what's a win for them? They are going to be looking to go into these communities. And one of the things that we have to demand is that they participate in the communities. And so you'll hear this buzz over and over again. So if you are a social equity awardee, you have to understand that there is some parts there that create for what we consider sweat equity, meaning that you are a pillar in the community. Maybe you have a great relationship with the municipality. Maybe you have a great, whatever it is, you're able to obtain real estate. All of these things, boots on the ground, will actually participate and help you kind of leverage what you have. But the key to it is being savvy enough to not get into a predatory contract. We see predatory contracts in every industry, from tech to music and everything else. So obtaining counsel, obtaining CPAs, obtaining all these different things and actually putting the work in so that you can leverage your conversation with larger entities to become a subsidiary or to be able to obtain funds or even be able to leverage and create partnerships that are positive and you still control the interest.
Oof. God, man, I am so glad we were recording this. This is going to be up on our Facebook page. Ashley's taken copious notes. We've got one, right? We've got one more question, and then we're going to open up. There's a couple audience questions already before we let our beautiful, wise, and dynamic speakers go on with the rest of their evening.
Really?
I want to direct, right? I know. I'm just trying to build you guys up. Takura, you already kind of answered this, so I would love it if you would just expand on what you talked about a little bit. And this will be our last question that we had for you guys. How is the criminalization of marijuana related to systemic injustice and inequity? And I feel like you started to talk about it when you talked about the history of where some of these policies came from, but do you want to say more there?
So at a micro level, right, we call them the gatekeepers, right? The police. They police. I assure you, I moved recently, earlier this year, and very rarely do I see police officers in my neighborhood. If I drive to the south side of Lansing, many more police officers, and the relationships are different. The response time is different, and the things that they are doing and looking for and talking about and concerned with are much different on the south side than where I live, right? And it's amazing how many reports we've read where these police officers, I don't know what it is, they must have this super nose issue to them, because every time they pull someone over, they smell freshly burnt marijuana, and then it just rolls and rolls into. But again, as the way that these laws, even though it doesn't say in there that minorities or other folks are meant to be policed any differently, just the way that prosecutors and so on act on them, use their discretion, just the way it impacts people of color is much, much different than it impacts others. And again, this history goes way, way back, centuries. But as it relates to marijuana, it started with, again, tamping down on folks of Mexican origin and it is just evolved. You know, we have the disparate treatment of folks depending on what type of crack, cocaine, powder, and so on and so on. But as it relates to marijuana, just the way that these laws are applied and the sentences they're given. We saw a report very recently out of Washtenaw County, right? A lot of times we talk about, out of California, but in Washtenaw County, I forget the name of the organization, but they broke down all like the top 10 offenses that people spend time on. And for the very same offenses, based on the race of an individual, blacks and browns got longer sentences. And the arrests were made more frequently for black and brown people. So just as applied, the way that these laws are applied, they impact minority people much differently.
Wow. You guys, I don't want this ever to end. This is such a great conversation. We have a few audience questions that we can take before we let everyone go. The first one that got asked was, hey, if I want to give my friend a gift of marijuana, can I do that? Like, what if I just out of the kindness, it's your birthday. What if I want to get a birthday present? Can I do that? Can I gift someone some marijuana?
You can as long as you're over 21 and it's within the limits. You can't give them, 12 pounds of marijuana. You can't give them 100 plants of marijuana. You know what I'm saying?
Not that nice, Mary.
You can. If somebody wants to give you that gift, you can do that. The issue with distribution was never that there was a price, right? So you had people initially when medical marijuana laws were passed, people would say, well, I'm not selling marijuana. I'm giving it away for free and I'm asking for a donation or it's a gift. The price associated with it was never the issue. It was always just the distribution portion of it. So sharing is fine within limits. It's when you share too much and, with too many people, that's the problem. But if you want to give your friend a birthday gift of marijuana, have at it.
So even if, say, they made a donation to the cause, that's still okay.
I mean, the donation thing is always kind of a lie, right? You know what I'm saying?
Yes,
So,
okay.
I mean, that's never true. And no one ever believes that. So I wouldn't use that as a defense. T, what do you think? Am I missing anything?
I do not. And it sounds like another case, McQueen or something like that you may know a little bit about. But anyway, we won't go down that rabbit hole. But I agree with you. No, nothing to add on that point.
Well, and it looks like we have one more question. So if they decriminalize or reschedule marijuana, will that change under federal law? I'm not sure if they mean, does the question asker mean if they decriminalize it, will that change they must mean under federal law. I'm not really sure what they mean by this one. Ashley, what do you think?
The FDA.
I'm trying to interpret it. I would ask our panelists, what do they think is being asked here, and what is the best answer to give?
Oh, great. I love you.
I think you're talking about under federal law, don't you?
It has to be, because the FDA, right, they're the ones who set the schedules. And if it changes from Schedule 1 or is removed off the schedule of prohibited drugs, I think that's what they're getting at. Yes, because it's legal under Michigan law. So I think they can only be talking about.
So
federal.
Michigan. Go ahead. No, go ahead, Simone.
No, one thing that people have to understand about how this whole FDA kind of thing, and I can take you down a whole rabbit hole. But one thing that I want you guys to understand, before they do that, right, with the FDA, there has to be testing done, and the testing usually takes about 3 to 4 years. I don't know if you guys know this, right? And so what happens is, y'all know how we watch the commercials and it's like the real cute couple, nice couple, they're older couple, and they on the beach and they holding hands and they say, oh, I used to do that or whatever, but now, and then it says could cause diarrhea, death, blindness or whatever. They have to do studies for a long enough time to be able to make those to put that disclaimer on there to make sure that it heals and all that other stuff. The biggest problem is very few doctors or very few researchers globally wanted to take on the challenge. So there has been there's been research, but limited research on what would be developed for FDA. That's just put a pin in that. Now there's more and more and more and more going. So before we see that, we have so many different levels of entities for us to be able to see the total like federal legalization. But decriminalization and rescheduling, I'm going to let you guys reach out to that, because I think they are talking about what that looks like federally and what that's going to look like for them.
So Michigan adopts essentially the federal classification. So if the feds reclassify it, then Michigan will be reclassifying it. I mean, they pretty much like go hand in hand. And I think the prior question, I just was thinking about it because I think it's from the same person, which is cool, is the issue when I joked about sharing, it's sharing too much, right? So it's one of the problems that we're seeing with prosecutions is people like, sharing with, 40 people, or 50 people, right? And, that's too much sharing, right? That level of sharing is not good, because that's where we're seeing distribution charges still come up with folks in state court. It's not like you and your friend, like watching a movie, or you and your friend, like going to a concert. It's like that wide level of sharing.
All right, so no Ponzi schemes.
No weed Ponzi schemes.
No weed Ponzi schemes.
Who has enough weed to give to 40 of they free? Just lay it around in their basement.
You'd be surprised. Listen, yeah.
Who has that much weed on hand? Oh, yeah,
Miley Cyrus.
From me and 40 of my friends. I'm not doing nothing with it.
Because it's not really their friends. You know what I mean? That's the thing.
Right. That's funny.
Oh my goodness.
This has definitely been a unique conversation and experience. My brain is like, you are a challenge. There's so much that I have to sit and process, because you challenge so much of what I thought I knew. And I think even in teaching me, there's so many more things that I'm like, oh, dang, I really didn't understand that. So I just want to say, from Katie and myself and from Legal Services of Eastern Michigan, we thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. Quick note, we're going to take a beat next month. So there will be no Legal Lounge conversation. What is this, July 2021?
In August.
Time. So there will not be one in August, but we will return in September. On which date, Katie?
Ooh, September 21st. September 21st. It is Disability Awareness Month in September. So we will be back to talk to you about disability law in September on the 21st. Same time, same place. Ashley, what is it always the same? Great energy.
Energy. Oh, look, I can't even do it now because you look at me, Katie. What she said. Thank you so much. Appreciate you all. Peace and power. Xander, take us out.
Take us out.